Hello, welcome to our podcast. Today's topic is 10 obstacles to consider when automating access to telecommunications and technology portals. My name is Joe Basili with ETMA, and I'm delighted to have two guest speakers from Weeldi today. We have Mathieu Guilmineau and Moe Arnaiz, from Weeldi, and they're headquartered in San Francisco, in the San Francisco Bay Area. And they enable companies of any size or technical ability to stably automate processes on the web. And that includes APIs, user interfaces with no scale, with no coding rather, and totally at scale. So both large as well as smaller companies. So with that, let's get into today's topic, which is this idea of obstacles to gain access through automation to these portals. So before we dive into it, for folks that are not really that familiar with this topic, let's discuss why it's so difficult. And Mo, why don't you take it?
Yeah, so specific to the telecom and technology management use case is when you automate in those environments, you're automating on the web. And the web is naturally something that evolves often, and the web is not something that's well defined. There's not one version of the web. There's multiple different versions of things that you run into on websites. So naturally, automation favors predictability, and if you have a predictable process and a predictable way to execute that process, it works better. The challenge with the telco or telecom portals is that you have various different types of websites. Those websites are changing, and then you're trying to automate on them. So that becomes the challenge of that environment. The other thing is typically in those companies, they don't have APIs available that you can access. So you're stuck using the website interface to be able to get things done. So that's really your source of being able to automate.
Great. And if we could, let's get into really the specific obstacles. Let's dive into them, Mathieu. What sort of obstacles do you see that most organizations face when they're trying to automate access to these portals?
Yeah, on the web, there's a lot of flexibility for vendors to make changes all the time, to update their UI, to fix bugs, to insert ads. And so as you record your automation, you can be sure that a couple of days later, things will have changed slightly and it will break your automation. So that's on the experience on the portal itself when you can reach it. Then we have all the network instability. You may not even be able to reach the website with maintenance downtime, change that's coming in an unpredictable fashion and being reverted, new functionality. And so it's really a unique environment where you cannot just expect things to be the same as they were the day before. There's also, on the flip side, some vendors that do not actually update their website for many years. They use old libraries. They don't really know how to code properly, or they incorporate fancy new libraries, but in an incorrect fashion, like including a CAPTCHA system that actually is not well incorporated. And so now you have this environment that doesn't keep up with the modern browsers that get updated every month. And those websites are not performing very well. And so if you're trying to automate on top of it, it becomes a real challenge. That's on the user experience. I've not even talked yet about security and protections.
So let's get into that, because obviously security is a big issue. It's billing data often, and it's usage data. So I'm sure a lot of the vendors want to keep it secure, but on your end, when you're trying to automate things, that must present some interesting challenges.
Those are actually the main reasons why customers find a challenge even accessing their data. They have to go through a login. They need to get their login credentials. They need to have those login credentials handy. But at the same time, they need to keep those secure. So, what's the answer? Some secret vault? How do they access it? Who can access to it? That's not enough to have login. Then you need two-factor authentication, text, an SMS, an email, and a CAPTCHA level. And all of those are designed to prevent unauthorized access or to prevent massive data scraping. But there's also some other protections, bot protections that websites put in place to maintain a decent response time so they don't get overwhelmed with denial of service. So your automation should not be so intrusive that it causes an adverse effect and you get banned. So all of those aspects also in the web don't come up on a regular application.
Gotcha. Okay. And what are the benefits? Like, what's the return on investment from automation? What do clients typically see in that regard?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I think the return on investment, the good news is I think it's always improving, and a lot of people are, this is kind of widely in the news right now, is we're experiencing, a shortage of available employees, and then inflation, things are getting more expensive. And one of the easiest ways to combat both of those things is to automate the tasks that you can automate. So at the simplest level, the value return for automating is taking something that a human who needs to be trained, managed, vacation, all the different things that go into having an employee, being able to automate that manual task, then take that employee and have that employee be able to focus more on the customer, right? Because at the same time, things are competitive, customer requirements, customer demands are getting greater. The best people usually to meet those, especially the newer demands, are going to be the people. So freeing your people up from the tedious tasks is your best return. The more strategic long-term vision here is that you have to consider is that if you're not automating now and your competition has started to automate now, anytime you take on something new like automation, there's always challenges. You kind of have this little valley before you get this huge benefit, right? If you don't take that on sooner than later, what happens is your competition starts to be on the upturn, and now you're still entering that valley because you're thinking about implementing this later. And the gap between your services, your delivery, your pricing, your profitability, and what your competition who's decided to take on automation has can become huge, right? And this is where you hear the term in technology disruption or disruptor. You're disrupting traditional ways of doing things. So the benefit strategically is that you position your business for the future versus sticking to injecting people in the middle of things that don't require human interaction. Joe, we can't hear you. I think you might have hit the mute button. Yeah. There we go.
Where do you begin in this whole process then? Nobody wants to fall behind.
Yeah. So I think the wisest place to begin is you don't want to try to boil the whole ocean, as they say. You want to start with looking at your tasks that are well-defined and that have higher volume. And what we see can be a tendency is folks get excited about the concept of automation. They want to automate everything tied to a particular use case. So like interacting with portals, and that's really a dangerous place to start. What you want to do is start with the processes that, again, have the clearest definition and also the highest volume, and then work your way down the list. And in reality, you're likely going to end up with a certain amount of processes that just don't make sense to be automated, but you can get started with those high volume processes. They'll also give you the highest return the fastest.
Makes sense. So start with high volume and don't try to boil the whole ocean. Got it. So as we wrap things up with this podcast, what are some of the key takeaways that you want our listeners to really think about?
I can take that one, and then Matthew, feel free to add. I think one, and particularly in this time of where we're at with technology, is get started. Look at those high volume processes that are defined and get started. Start doing something, even if it's not automating everything. Start doing something. The second part is, as you look into the market, realize for tools to help out with this, realize that what you're automating is the web, and the web has all these different obstacles like Matthew mentioned earlier. And that's just the high level of the obstacles. I mean, really, this thing gets way bigger. Make sure that the tools you use can speak to solving those challenges. If not, those are going to fall back on you or your team to somehow solve or work around, or in some cases, automation can continue to break, and then it defeats the purpose or the value of having the automation. And then the third piece is, if you do decide to tackle it internally and you don't want to use a tool to do it, make sure then you have the resources on a permanent basis to solve this problem, because the web is not something that you solve once with automation and then you're done and you can move on to other projects. once you solve it once, it's going to be constantly evolving. So those resources are going to have to be available to continue to evolve your tool that you've developed to maintain these automations.
Great
I think
points.
that's it.
Mathieu?
Yeah, I would like to emphasize security most of all. As you automate, you're replacing someone who's a human, will perform a tedious, repetitive task. Eventually, they make errors. They might be the cause of some leak of data as well. And so by adding automation and building security around it, suddenly you actually are better off on the security side as well. Also with less errors and better documentation of the process. So there's a lot. It's not just that you gain competitive edge and scale, but also security-wise, it is the right time and the right thing to do.
Excellent. So how can people learn more, find out about your firm, and get in touch?
Yeah, I think the easiest way is just to go to our website, and they can contact us, open a form directly on the website, and somebody in sales will reach out. And usually we start off by trying to understand their use case, see if it matches up well for our tool set, and then we can go deeper from there and even get to a point where they can test out how this works for their particular use case.
And what is your website again?
It's Weeldi.com. That's WEELDI.com. And people ask us all the time, where does the name Weeldi come from? And it is actually invented by Mathieu as we were trying to figure out a company name when we co-founded this company. And it's the opposite of unwieldy, because automating on the web is traditionally very unwieldy. Obviously, we spelled it different for Google search, but that's the purpose of Weeldi. And we do exclusively focus on automation on the web. So that's our world.
Fantastic. And I'm so glad we got the story of your company name in there as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, guys. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks, Joe.